Hello and welcome to the Mobalytics patch 11.2 tier list. Hope you've all had a great start to the ranked season. What's that? Your bot lanes are feeding? Your jungler won't gank? Mid laner won't roam? Well, don't sweat it. I'm sure this next week will be better, and hopefully the info in this video will help find you the right champions to make your climb. I'm Danox Harrison. Let's get stuck into the second patch of the season. Starting off with the top lane, in the God tier we have Nasus, Darius and Malphite, and in the S tier we have Cho'Gath, Sion, Wukong, Garen, Pantheon, Shen, Soraka, Karma and Lulu. So the first big change of the patch has been to the tanks. We've seen both Turbo Chem Tank and Frostfire Gauntlet changed. Now over time, with constant nerfs to Sunfire, we've seen these two look better and better in comparison, particularly Frostfire Gauntlet. They've now been made 400 gold cheaper and received some extra ability haste. They did lose a bit of resist, but that's not really relevant when you'll get your core item finished so much sooner and can put that extra gold towards tier 2 boots or your second item. At this point, Frostfire Gauntlet is looking like the best tank mythic, and the champions who can utilize it well are looking way better. That being said, even for champions where Sunfire was the optimal choice, I expect them to move to the alternatives after this change. Gargoyle Stoneplate also received a decent buff with regards to how much you can stack in terms of resistances, and honestly I think this item was already decent before, it just tended to be a late game option with how it interacted with already having a large pile of resists, so now you can probably pick it up a bit sooner and still get a solid effect from it. In terms of top lane champion changes, I'd say the most significant was a nerf to Darius, but in honesty, I don't think it's quite enough to knock him out of God tier. The nerf was to the amount of AD you'd get with your passive stacked, but I don't think taking away a little bit of AD will stop him from dominating once he has it stacked, as the bleed damage is a significant factor as well. We've also seen an influx of support champs into the top lane, with Moonstone and Staff of Flow and Water being a really overpowered build that was popularized by LS, starting to crop up everywhere. Our top expert believes these champs are really oppressive, and it does not matter at all how the laning phase goes, within reason, as the scaling is incredible. The reason this item combo works so well is Moonstone doesn't require healing or shielding on the champion, it just needs AP scaling, spammable abilities, and ideally to be in a more utility role. Moonstone heals whenever you affect a champion with an ability in combat, so that can be offensive or defensive, and whenever you heal an ally you get the AP bonus from Staff of Flow and Water, so you end up with a ton more AP than you'd initially think, on top of the fact that Moonstone has bonkers numbers when it comes to healing. If you are playing it, then be sure to mouse over it and just see the disgusting amount of healing it puts out. So moving on to our champion highlights, we're looking at Cho'Gath, and he's been doing better and better patch by patch. He's tanky and capable of soaking a ton of damage while throwing out that CC. His laning is solid thanks to his built-in sustain and wave clear. The significant thing on this patch is the cheaper Frostfire Gauntlet. Being able to pick this up 400 gold sooner means you hit an earlier spike, and assuming you're evening lane, you're getting your mythic substantially quicker than bruiser top laners you might be facing. The extra slow capability means once you're on top of someone, they'll struggle to get away, and the increased size means you can end up being absolutely massive, and once you have the HP stacked up, you'll be a hard target to kill. The buff Gargoyle is also a great pickup to extend that sustainability in teamfights, and I'm sure all of you have had those scenarios where it hits late game and one team has a hyper tank top laner and the other has something like a Pantheon or Teemo. We all know who's going to win that game. Sion is another tank who benefited massively from the cheaper tank mythics. He was, again, already performing solidly at higher ranks, and I do think he's a bit tricky to pilot than Cho'Gath, but his engage potential is massive, and that adds another element of strength. Charging in and locking down opponents is the ideal fantasy of a tank, and when you got tons of HP to back you up and that added stickiness of Gauntlet, it's frustrating to deal with. Laning is actually solid. A lot of people have this interpretation that tanks are weak in lane but make up for it with scaling, but Sion can hold his own into most matchups. Ranged champions can be a bit trickier, but you can use your abilities to quickly clear waves, and once you hit 6 you have easy setup for a gank from your jungler or potentially a solo kill. After that 6 point as well, you're in a prime position to go for a roam bot lane and look to snowball the map in your favour. Lulu is back in the top lane. The Yordle Menace has strong laning with the harass and self peel, and once you hit that Moonstone, Staff of Flow and Water spike, you're capable of having a huge impact in any fights or skirmishes. Grouping up with your jungler and buffing them is really advantageous, especially if it's a champion like Olaf who will benefit massively from this. Lulu isn't infallible though. Care for pesky split pushers like Camille who will beat you in the side lane with your more supportive build. That being said, your polymorph goes a long way towards keeping you safe even in rougher matchups. Karma and Soraka can both function in similar ways, but Lulu's self peel makes her a safer option and the one we recommend if you want to abuse the item combo before it gets nerfed. Moving on to the jungle. In the God tier we have Nunu, Udyr and Ivan, and the S tier we have Elise, Skarner, Olaf, Hecarim, Rammus and Kha'Zix. So with regards to the jungle, there hasn't been a ton of changes. We did see some light nerfs come in for Olaf and Elise, but ultimately I think they're strong enough to shake those off. Protobelt being nerfed was a bit of a hit to Echo. They nerfed the movement speed bonus and the duration, and this is off the back of its damage being nerfed and Night Harvester also being hit, so at this point he's really struggling for mythics to build that haven't been toned down a bit. I'm sure a ton of you have heard about the Moonstone Sapphire Flow and Water combo, which I literally just talked about, but specifically on Lilia and Nidalee. I will say that these champions tend to be trickier to execute on at lower ranks. They're definitely strong, but the place in our tier list reflects how a low elo player will perform on them. If you're confident in your skills and have some experience in the champs, then they're definitely capable of success, but diving into your ranked games with first time Nidalee Moonstone probably won't go so well. Elise has been dominating in the early game. I actually thought the recent nerfs to Right Harvester would hold her back, but she's received a few bug fixes in the past couple of patches, and I think more than anything they seem to have been a bigger factor as her success has skyrocketed recently. For those looking to dominate the early game and take control of their games in the new season, then she's definitely a solid pick. Great burst damage, hard CC to help solidify ganks, and a lot of power in the mid game allows Elise to really steamroll once she gets rolling. I think the sheer burst available on the new items and the pace at which games snowball once they're secured makes it unsurprising that she's doing so well. Skarner has been kinda slept on over the preseason, and I think now is really his patch to take over. His win rate has consistently been solid, and with the reduced cost of Chem Tank, I think he's in prime position to dominate. Having early access to that movement speed boost is a godsend on a champion who sings so well with it, and on top of that, having Gale Force nerfed to a 90-second cooldown means they're now in line with each other, so if you're targeting the enemy AD carry, you should always have it up when they have Gale Force, and as long as you're approaching from the right angle, the extra movement speed should be enough to close the gap even with that dash. I think the sheer power AD carries have at the moment means Skarner being able to shut them down gives them huge value. I will say though, Olaf is a very rough matchup for Skarner. He is being banned quite often, but be cautious if he's left open, you pick Skarner into it, probably going to have a bad time. Mundo has not really been seen for a while in the jungle. After the Sunfire nerfs, he fell off a cliff, but slowly over time he's been starting to do better and better, and on this patch not only do we get big buffs to the other tank mythics, but Mundo is also getting massive buffs to his kit. More health back on his Q means he'll have a much healthier clear, reduced cost in his E, more damage on his E, and more healing on his R all means he's in a much better spot. He still might struggle a bit against early invades, but being higher health will mitigate that to an extent, and his late game is going to be even better now. And if you start to snowball on Mundo, he does just become unkillable. I don't think he's going to be S tier or God tier, but if you enjoyed playing Mundo during preseason and dropped him because you started to struggle, now is the time where you can start to pick him back up again and start launching briefcases at your opponents. Moving to the mid lane, in the God tier we have Seraphine, Pantheon and Anivia, and in the S tier we have Annie, Malzahar, Galio, Fizz, Echo and Victor. Now, mid lane seen little changes on the patch. There was some buffs to LeBlanc and Azir, but they both struggle massively in solo queue, even when they're broken at the competitive level, so the buffs aren't really enough to change that, particularly at low elo. One significant change was the nerf to Rocket Belt. The damage was recently nerfed, and now the active gives less movement speed and for less duration. This has knocked Fizz and Echo down a peg, as although they dodged the Night Harvester nerfs by moving to Rocket Belt as their mythic, they've now had this nerfed as well, and will be a bit weaker. It's good, just not quite as good as they were. Galio is also going to suffer from this nerf. Katarina no longer applies Kraken Slayer on-hit effects fully on her abilities, which is a big reason why she was going with an on-hit build, so she's suffering a little bit as a result. Akali had her energy costs and her Q raised, which is actually a big nerf whenever this happens and is likely directed to her success at High-ELO, so she's massively struggling at lower ranks. Yone, again a champion who's doing really well at High-ELO, is still fine at lower ranks but wasn't justified to be put in S tier. On to our highlight champions. First up is Victor, and he's someone who really popped off at the start of the preseason and then was largely forgotten once he got nerfs and Lich Bane was toned back, but he's still doing really well, and this is a reminder that in the right matchups he can still dominate. His ability to control teamfights and lay down consistent damage makes him an excellent choice when you need an AP champion who can deal with the tanks we expect to see popping up. He can also burst effectively, so with AD carry being so strong, he can be an effective answer, although unfortunately with Gale Force, it's essentially like a Western duel where whoever fires first will likely one-hit the other in the later stages. Look to farm up, get a couple of items and your upgrades, and you're in prime position to carry your games. When you give AD carries an extra dash, there's a certain champion who just doesn't care how mobile you are. Malzahar is a great answer to Supersonic Jhin, backline diving Kai'Sa, and plenty more irritating champs who are too mobile for their own good. He's also decent at burning through tanks with his percentage HP damage, and Liandry's been his go-to mythic. He's a simple champion but an effective one, and a great answer in the current meta. Post 6 he has really good gank setup for your jungler, and before that his wave clear is consistent and easy to help him control the wave. Neeko is performing really well at the moment. Her solid wave clear combined with the pick potential allows her to take over games. If you're looking for a champion who can single-handedly win a teamfight with her ultimate, then she's definitely the pick for you. Her burst damage with Ludens is huge and allows you to pop people with just EQ when you're ahead. When teamfighting with Neeko, it's best to follow up on ally CC or look for flanks where you can move in with your stealth and land a devastating combo on the backline. Her ult scaling is 130% of your AP, so if you get fed, you really hit like a truck. Moving on to the AD carries, and it stayed relatively similar for this patch, and even with the nerf to Gale Force CD, it's still super powerful, and AD carry is still an extremely powerful role. The only real movement we've seen is Sivir moving up a tad and Draven moving down. Expecting in subsequent patches, we may see Gale Force toned down a bit again, just as it's being neutralized by so many different champions, particularly the mobile ones who already have strong kits to keep themselves safe, but then get an extra dash to go aggressive or defensively with. It's really oppressive right now, and as much as they did nerf it this patch, going from 60 seconds to 90 seconds isn't a drastic difference. Realistically, in a team fight, you're still only going to use it once in most of them. It's not too common that you're going for like a super long extended team fight, and it's just the impact of that item. It's like having a flash on a 90-second cooldown, which is crazy. Moving on to our signature picks, Vayne. So for a long time, she's been a favorite for a lot of AD carry players, sometimes to great success and sometimes to less success. At the moment, with Kraken Slayer and Phantom Dancer, she's capable of shredding any target in front of her with a crazy amount of attack speed and true damage. Specifically into Kai'Sa, she's a solid dancer as you can effectively duel her when she dives in on her, and can trade effectively in the laning phase by using minions to soak Kai'Sa's Q. Vayne really spikes at that 2 item point, but with the new season you have tons of options regarding your build with defensive and offensive choices to help deal with any scenario. Ashe's laning can be really devastating, particularly into plenty of the short range matchups in the meta. She can harass and control the lane. With the cheaper runans, her 2 item spike is really effective and can go any of the ADC mythics depending on what she needs. Ashe's DPS in the mid to late game can shred through anything if she's given the space and peel, so it's important to pick her into a composition that can give her space. Her ult is a great tool to find picks for your team as well, and the cooldown is relatively short considering the impact it has. You might be surprised seeing Seraphine in the AD carry role, but she's a really solid option. Her wave clear is great and her scaling is massive. Now there's 2 options. You can go for a full AP build with Ludens, which will give you higher damage and wave clear, or Moonstone it to Staff of Flow and Water, as you know we discussed plenty of times before. It's more of a supportive build for her, and it works well when you have other carries on your team. For either build, it's best to have some source of AD from the rest of your team, otherwise it'll make defensive itemization really easy for your opponents and cause some issues. Seraphine's ult is super high impact, and the range extends when passing through allies or enemies, so it can easily devastate the enemy team in a choke. Finally, moving to supports. In the God tier we have Leona and Seraphine, and the S tier we have Janna, Soraka, Alistar, Lulu, Zilean and Thresh. Now supports have had a pretty big shift up. The major changes on the patch are the nerf to Imperial Mandate and the new recognition of the power of Moonstone combined with Staff of Flow and Water. You're probably sick of hearing about that by now. As a result of the Mandate nerfs combined with a direct nerf to his kit, Maokai has dropped from S tier. Nami suffered a similar fate due to her reliance on the item, and Morgana just hasn't been doing as well recently, partially due to enchanters being good matchups into her. Janet dodged the nerfs so she doesn't proc Mandate nearly as frequently, mostly just with her W, and so she can still use it well. Her kit is all around just generally solid on top of that. Alistar has been smashing it up in competitive and high-elo, and that success has translated down as he is one of the premier melee supports. Karma, despite losing a lot of power with Mandate, is actually far strong with Moonstone and so has moved up to A tier, although it is tentative as her win rate was extremely dire and she's definitely worse than the other enchanters who are utilising the item. Zilean has had solid numbers throughout the preseason and usually is utilised with Imperial Mandate, but due to the nerfs this patch it's likely we'll see him moving away from it. However, an effective build for him is Moonstone into Staff of Flow and Water. As I mentioned before, this item's success isn't dictated by how much healing he has, but more so how effectively you can spam abilities, and Zilean is great at doing so with his W allowing him to reset his cooldowns. It's also really powerful for healing your allies back up after reviving them with your ultimate. Early laning can be a bit tricky, so be sure to utilise your bombs for stuns and your ability to avoid aggressive laners like Leona. Making out of the laning phase drastically increases your chances to win as Zilean scales so incredibly well. Soraka is another champ who's been doing consistently well, but she's also been buffed on this patch, and that in tandem with the effectiveness of Moonstone means she's really obnoxious to play against. She's got bonuses to her Q self-healing and the healing on her W, which are both massive bonuses to her overall healing output and her laning. One of her most powerful tools is her silence for mitigating aggression from the enemy team, and it's great at following up CC to guarantee your root and really make your opponents suffer. The sustain she has in lane helps her survive against plenty of harass, and consistently landing Qs will keep you topped up while chunking your opponents. Similar to Zilean, she scales incredibly well and becomes a high priority for enemy teams to target, so positioning is critical to find success. Rel's definitely had a slow start since her release. She's a little bit tricky to get used to, but she's a really powerful laner as she has tons of CC and is great at locking down targets. Her ability to roam is really powerful as well, with a mounted form giving her extra movement speed, and in teamfights her ult combined with her stun can find huge AoE CC combos to set your team up, and honestly she's just really fun to play. I think if you've been given Rel a miss because she was a bit underwhelming on release, then it's a good time to give her a go and see if you find success. Aggression is the key when playing her, and she has a similar style to Sett or Alistar support where you're dictating fights and engaging powerfully. That wraps things up for patch 11.2. Despite the season having started, I expect a lot of big changes to continue over the next few patches to iron things out, as there's a lot of items really overperforming and plenty of champions too. So be sure to subscribe and keep updated with what's working and what's struggling in the meta. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.